Welcome to the deep dive. You've given us your sources, and, well, our mission is to pull out the key knowledge you need fast.
Yeah, efficiently.
Today, we're really zeroing in on this method called T4T. We're using insights from a book to figure out, what parts are flexible and what's the solid core you can't really change.
Right. You're aiming to get a good handle on this without getting overwhelmed. So our job today is basically to break down T4T. We'll look at its fundamental principles and where you can adapt it so you can see how it might play out in different situations.
Exactly. And this book we're looking at, it seems to have two main goals. First, it wants to shed light on God's ways, his kingdom, so we can, get aligned with his spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And second, it put forward T4T as a practical, adaptable way to kickstart these things called church planting movements, or CPMs. Okay, so let's unpack this. What's the very first thing we need to nail down?
Well, the absolute first key is realizing that CPM and T4T, they're connected, but they're definitely not the same thing. The book is really clear on this distinction. CPM is the big goal, that movement of churches multiplying rapidly. T4T is a specific method, maybe think of it like a toolkit, designed to help ignite that movement.
Right, okay, so CPM is the vision, the big wave of church growth, and T4T is one specific strategy, one approach to try and make that happen.
Precisely. And the book really stresses that the core ideas, the principles behind CPM, these are timeless. They're meant to be passed down generation to generation. It even points to Psalm 78 about teaching future generations.
Timeless principles, got it.
Yeah, these CPM principles are presented as sort of bedrock truths. But here's where it gets interesting, the contrast with T4T itself, because T4T is a method. It's built, to be adapted.
Okay.
We should actually expect to learn and tweak it as we use it in different places.
Yeah.
But this is where potential problems can creep in. This necessary adaptation isn't without risks.
Yeah, the book mentions dangers, right? Dangers of confusion. What are the main traps people fall into when they try to use something like T4T?
Okay, so there are basically two big ones. The first is kind of idolizing the method, treating T4T as if it's set in stone, unchangeable.
Like it's the only way.
Exactly. Believing that if you just follow the steps exactly as someone else did, you'll automatically get the same results. The thinking goes, oh, well, it worked for Yinkai in his context, so I just need to copy it perfectly.
Right.
But the book hints that just copy-pasting might not work everywhere. It's like trying to replicate a winning formula without understanding why it worked. You need principled adaptation, not just blind copying.
That makes total sense. Like trying to run a champion football team's plays without having their star quarterback or understanding the strategy behind those plays.
Perfect analogy, yeah. Then the second danger is, well, it's basically the flip side.
Okay.
It's adapting T4T without really understanding the foundational kingdom principles that actually make it work for sparking a movement.
So you change things.
Yeah, you might tweak things to make them feel maybe more comfortable or logical in your setting, but you could accidentally cut out the very things, those kingdom principles, that fuel the whole movement.
Wow. So it really is a kind of tightrope walk, isn't it?
It is.
You need to adapt it for where you are, but you can't adapt away the core engine, basically.
Yeah.
The book even says that not getting the ways of the kingdom can actually stop it from growing. That's quite a statement.
It really is. It just highlights how vital it is to grasp the why behind the how. So keeping that balance in mind, let's dig into what the book says can be adapted within a T4T approach. It talks about a T4T package.
Yeah.
Sounds like it's got pieces you can swap out.
Yes, exactly. Reproducible components you can adjust. And it stresses that the very first step, before you change anything, is to really get your specific context. Things like the local worldview, literacy rates, how much people have already heard about the gospel.
Oh, absolutely critical. That understanding shapes every single adaptation you make. So the book then lays out these adaptable stages within the T4T package. It starts with mobilizing existing believers, casting vision, though it notes this is mainly for the persons starting the initiative.
Right, because later on, it's the new believers being mobilized. Okay, so after that initial step, what are the stages that need to be reproducible by pretty much anyone involved?
Okay, these next stages are designed for everyone to pass on. They include finding people who don't yet believe, but in ways that are easy for new believers to copy.
Simple methods.
Yeah. Then evangelism approaches that new believers can actually use effectively right away. Discipleship processes they can easily imitate, ways of starting churches that they can reproduce. And finally, leadership development that new believers experience and then know how to pass along themselves.
And it's not like a strict checklist, step one, step two.
Yeah.
The book says they often overlap, right?
Yeah.
Happening at the same time, which is what leads to that multi-generational growth.
Exactly. That's the engine of CPMs. So when we look at specific tools for these stages, maybe a particular gospel outline or a discipleship lesson, what's the filter? How do we know if it's okay to adapt it?
Good question.
The book gives 3 really clear criteria. First, whatever you use, it absolutely has to be biblical.
Non-negotiable.
Totally. Second, it needs to actually work, be effective in your specific context. And third, this is crucial, it must be reproducible in your context. Can the average new believer there actually learn it and pass it on easily?
Biblical, effective, reproducible.
Right.
Okay, that's a solid framework for thinking about adjustments.
Yeah.
But then what about the core stuff, the essentials? What must be in every T4T package, no matter the context?
Right. This is where the book gets quite specific. Absolute essentials. First, you have to have a way to mobilize existing believers with vision. The book mentions something called 3-minute vision casting, Play LS Session 1.
Session 1 sounds pretty important. What needs to be in that first meeting?
Okay, Session 1 needs to nail 3 things. The WHY, a really compelling vision piece that inspires people to act.
Get them motivated.
Exactly. Then the Kuyum, a practical way for them to identify people they already know, their network, their sphere of influence, often called an oikos name list.
Like friends, family, coworkers.
Precisely. And finally, the HASO W, a loving, simple, reproducible way to share the gospel. This includes a way to connect with people, a bridge, a clear gospel presentation that leads to a chance to commit, and then equipping the new believer right then and there to share with, say, 5 people that week.
Wow, that is packed for a first session, but it sounds like it's geared for immediate action, no waiting around.
That's the idea. Create momentum from day one.
Okay, what other absolutely critical parts make up this T4T package?
You also need a set of roughly 6 to 10 short-term discipleship lessons. These need to cover the real basics of Christian growth. The book specifically calls out lessons on baptism, the Lord's Supper.
Core practices.
Yep. And 1 or 2 lessons focus on becoming a church, maybe with a simple church covenant plan. Also, how to persevere through persecution, which is often a reality, and making sure they grasp the big picture, the Great Commission vision.
Foundational building blocks for sure. What else is on that essential list?
Okay, consistently, especially in the early weeks of training, the first part, maybe the first third, of each meeting needs to include these short vision casting bits or vignettes. Keep the why front and center.
Keep the motivation high.
Exactly. And critically, you need accountability questions. But not just any questions, they need to be designed strategically to push people progressively towards seeing 4th-generation believers in churches. G4 growth, they call it.
G4. 4th generation. That really hammers home the multiplication goal, doesn't it? Not just adding, but multiplying disciples in churches.
It absolutely does. That focus is key. Another essential. A clear way to launch people into long-term discipleship. This means a lesson teaching them how to study the Bible for themselves. Inductive Bible study is mentioned.
So they can feed themselves spiritually.
Right. Learn to understand Scripture on their own. And it suggests providing an initial study plan to get them started, maybe like the Gospel of Mark or a set of 40 key chronological Bible stories, something manageable.
So equipping for the long haul, not just the first few weeks. Makes sense. What about developing leaders?
Also non-negotiable. The plan has to include developing church leaders, the trainers, right from the start. The book suggests using that first part of each training session for this, shifting gradually from telling them what to do to helping them, watching them, and then empowering them to lead.
Kind of like an apprenticeship model.
Sort of, yeah. It mentions things like mid-level leadership retreats or training days and uses the acronym MALUL model, assist, watch, leave, as a way to think about that development process.
MAWL. Model, assist, watch, leave. Okay. Investing in people who invest in others. And the last essential piece mentioned is tracking progress.
Yes, a system for tracking. This needs a few parts. Accountability specifically for that G4 growth, using those progressive questions. You also need some way to actually keep records, to verify that new generations are forming. And then a reporting system to look at the overall picture, see what's working, what needs adjusting.
Okay, so those are the core pieces that really should be there. Now, the flip side. What does the book say we should not adapt, or at least be super careful about changing?
Right. So while you've got flexibility with specific content, like the exact words of your gospel presentation or the details in a discipleship lesson, as long as they hit those biblical, effective, reproducible marks, there are fundamental processes that are vital for reproduction. These, the book warns, should be changed only with extreme caution or maybe not at all.
Wait, what are these core processes we shouldn't mess with too much?
First and foremost, it's the structure of the training time itself. The book mentions 3 parts, and while the specific order of the 7 components within a session might flex, it highlights these 4 as crucial for reproduction. Accountability, vision casting, practicing the skills, and setting goals with prayer. Those need to happen consistently.
Accountability, vision casting, practice, setting goals with prayer, the engine room of the training. Got it. What else is on the handle with care list?
A clear, compelling gospel presentation, one that's shared often and always includes a clear opportunity for people to respond, to commit. The book really emphasizes that movements run on fuel from consistent person-to-person witnessing.
So no watering down the gospel message or the call to respond.
Definitely not. Also critical, those 1 or 2 clear lessons on what it means to be the church, lessons that actively launch the group into functioning as a church, and those vision casting vignettes we mentioned. They need to stay simple, easy for new believers to remember and pass on. Don't make them too complex.
Keep it simple, keep it shareable. What about those accountability questions again?
Yes, the structure of those questions, the way they progressively push towards the 4th generation, that sequence shouldn't be altered. The book actually lists the progression. Witness, are you sharing? Starter, are you helping start groups?
Yeah.
Trainer, are you training others?
Right.
Trainer of trainers, and then trainer of trainers who trains trainers.
Oh, that's specific.
It is, because that progression is designed very intentionally to keep driving the multiplication forward.
Makes the goal very concrete at each stage. Okay, what other areas require caution when adapting?
Keeping the whole movement obedience-based, centered on those 2 great commands, love God, love neighbor, and the Great Commission. Or Mark 1.17, follow me and I'll make you fishers of men.
So action-oriented, based on following Jesus' commands.
Yes, but critically, and the book stresses this, it needs a loving environment. Real love for God, real love for each other, built through genuine life-on-life relationships. This is vital to prevent it from becoming just, a sterile works-based program. Accountability for personal godliness matters just as much as accountability for witnessing. It even references Revelation 2, the church that did all the right things but lost its first love.
That's a really important balance, the heart behind the activity. Anything else on the caution list?
Trainers need to be consistently challenged as things grow to start more than one group. Having trainers leading 2 or more groups significantly speeds up the spread. And finally, it's just essential that trainers at every level know exactly what the next step is.
Yeah.
How do you smoothly go from evangelism to discipleship, from discipleship to church? What do you do when someone says yes at each point?
Clear pathways.
Very clear pathways. The book also mentions maybe having an expanded gospel track, like a creation to Christ overview, ready for people who are interested but need a bit more time or information.
So anticipating different needs while keeping the main path clear. Okay, if we boil it all down, what's the main principle guiding adaptation in T4T?
The bottom line seems to be, hold fast to the eternal, unchanging principles of God's kingdom. But be thoughtful, be strategic, and yes, be willing to adapt the methods, the practical tools of T4T so they actually work effectively to reach people in your specific time and place. You adapt the how, but you don't compromise the core why or the essential reproductive engine. The goal, as the book puts it, is sparking a discipleship re-revolution.
Discipleship re-revolution.
Yeah.
And it sounds like this tension, this balance between principles and methods is relevant even in places with existing churches or post-Christian cultures, which the book hints it will explore more later.
Absolutely. It seems universal. Discerning what's timeless truth versus what's a practical tool, and then using those tools skillfully to advance the truth right where you are.
Okay, that paints a really clear picture of the adaptable versus the foundational in T4T. Thanks, that was incredibly helpful.
Glad to walk through it.
So wrapping up, the big takeaway here is really understanding that dynamic interplay, isn't it, between the unchanging principles of a movement and the specific adaptable methods we might use to try and get it going.
Exactly. You need both.
But knowing which is which and where that flexibility really lies, that seems absolutely key for actually putting it into practice effectively.
Couldn't agree more.
And that leads us to our final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. Thinking about this balance we've just discussed in T4T structure on one hand, flexibility on the other, how might those same principles apply elsewhere? Maybe in other areas of your life or work where you're trying to foster growth or bring about change. Consider those specific components like vision, accountability, making things reproducible. How could they be relevant in your own world? Something to think about.